it's about that time that we get going. The room is filling in nicely. We'll have folks continue to join us. So over to you to kick us off today.
Thank you, Craig. Good morning, everybody. From wherever you are joining us today, we are delighted to see you all back in here. As Craig said, some familiar names and some brand new names too. Most of you, I think, maybe all, who knows, let us know in the chat, are joining us from Canada, somewhere in Canada, and a lot from here in Alberta. So you will know just how important it is to us just to pause at the beginning of every single time we do this to recognize and acknowledge where we're joining you from today. The picture there, you can see that's actually what SAIT's main campus looks like at the moment. This picture, I think, was taken last year by one of our good colleagues. And you'll see the recognition there with our teepee in the front of Heritage Hall. And having been a teacher for many years before we moved to Canada, September, I love September, just love September. It's fresh and it's different. And yes, we head to the stationery store. I've trained my kids to be stationery snobs as well. And everybody has a new pen for the beginning of September. But sometimes when you work in reconciliation, you have to sit in some uncomfortable truths. And this one hit me like a sledgehammer last year when we were chatting. And September isn't a brilliant time of year. September uncovers an awful lot of painful memories for a lot of people. And school isn't a brilliant place for an awful lot of people either. And that was a moment for me last year where I had to sit in some pretty deep and uncomfortable truths. And that doesn't mean that I let go of my excitement for this time of year, but it does hold a great deal of recognition. And when we stop each Friday, it's a little bit different. We'll recognize and we'll acknowledge where we are. So for Craig and I, based here in Calgary, and wherever you are, thank you for just taking a moment. In Calgary, SAIT acknowledges that it is situated on the traditional territories of the Blackfoot Confederacy. So today that encompasses our Indigenous people of the Treaty 7 region. That's the Siksika, the Piikani, the Kainai, the Tsuut'ina, the Stoney Nakoda, and the Northwest Métis homeland. SAIT also acknowledges all the people who make their homes in the Treaty 7 region of Southern Alberta. Thank you, everybody, for joining us this morning.
Excellent. Thank you, Jenny, as always. So well done.
Welcome.
And this morning, a couple things just to, we've been away for a couple months, so it might be a great opportunity. And it's tough to believe it's been a couple of months. Where did summer go to? But for those of you who have been here before, obviously, you know who we are. If you are new, if this is your first time here, I'm Craig Hess. I'm the Director of Corporate and International Training here at SAIT, and lead up a group who is very proud and happy to work with organizations to help them upskill and reskill. We have a course on public speaking that I'm happy to take as well. And Jenny, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Oh, on the spot so early on a Friday. Yeah. My name's Jenny Gilbert. Most of you can see that in the tile. I hold a number of different titles at SAIT, but work with Craig as leadership development specialist and sort of the main designer behind the first iteration of Leading Beyond Any Title. And it's going to take off in all sorts of different directions as it has already, but that's where we'll start today from.
Excellent. Perfect. And one thing I will add, so as we've gone through, this is episode 51, I believe.
I think so.
And
we're going with that.
We're going with episode 51. And one of the things that we've received a lot of feedback in the past is how do we consume this content after today? And so anybody registering for these webinars is going to get a link to the recording. But we're excited to share that we are doing some work behind the scenes right now to take all past episodes and everything going forward and move them into a podcast format as well. So there will be audio version that is going to be living out there in the etherverse for forever. I suppose, as long as we keep paying the hosting fees, and we might not quite hit Smartlist numbers, but we hope that it works for folks to continue picking up the information that we're sharing, and looking forward to telling you more about that in the future. So, Jenny, today we had quite the reaction number of respondents to this session around micromanagement. And so I'm not sure if it was folks missed us over the summer and rushed back September to hear us, or if it was the topic, but I'm going to go with a little bit of both. And let's start. Let's just, micromanagement. I think it probably raises hairs on the back of necks of most people. Creates a lot of uncomfortable feeling. And let's go from there. How do you describe micromanagement? What is it? Why is it an issue? And folks, as always, as we carry on, feel free to throw your comments in the chat, and any specific questions, please do pop them in the Q&A.
And those of you who caught my facial expression, that was the filter. How do I say this in a manner that can be replayed and replayed? What do we think of micromanagement? It's a really curious sort of why do we still have it is my first question. It's 2023 and this is still as prominent as it was 10-15 years ago. What is it? It's direction, it's control, but it's to an extent that it gets in the way. So I think the terminology is it's meddlesome. It's annoying. To some, it actually causes stress. It causes extra burnout or tension. They go extra tension in the end. We're going to get to burnout. And yet, I would say most people who are micromanagers don't even know that they're micromanaging. I don't think that they get up in the morning and say, I'm just going to see how many people I can annoy today, get in the way, slow work down, make people feel like they're kids at work, and I'll just parent them all the way. There you go. There's your starting point.
Yeah, I was just writing down a couple things that you mentioned there: direction and control, stress, tension, burnout. Ricardo, I love your comment here about it's horrible.
Yeah.
Let's just call it what it is. It is absolutely horrible. And I think there's a couple of ways to look at this. I think about this from the perspective of, if we've got a group of leaders on the line with us, Jenny, how can they recognize if they happen to be micromanaging, right? Like, to your point, some people do it, may not even realize it. I'll be honest, as a leader and a leader of many teams, it is probably one of my greatest fears is that my team thinks I'm micromanaging them, right?
And they don't tell you.
That is not what I want, because I've been micromanaged. And that's the other way we can look at this too, is if you've been micromanaged, how do you react? What do you do? So your choice is to whether we take it from the individual contributor view first or from the leader view first.
Well, let's go leaders first of all. And I think it's really important too that we know there is a time and a place for it. And I don't think we call it micromanagement when we get it in the right time and the right place. So, there are some sort of critical situations. We only want one person in charge, and we want one person who can take care of all the details and hold us all absolutely accountable to whatever that is. There's not too many places where that crops up or that is the case. And the other place is when you're onboarding somebody, and if you have specific standards, processes, ways, and even just that first sort of initial onboarding, and if your onboarding is good, it isn't going to feel like micromanagement. Like, that's a conversation before you even get started. So there is a time and a place for it. Another one of your questions, like, how do I know that? That's really difficult, because as humans, our self-awareness is rubbish. And I think I've said this before on a Friday, like Tasha Ulrich, I'm pretty sure that was the name, did some research on our self-awareness. And it's something like 87% of us would say, yep, self-aware. And the truth is only 12% of us are. And so one of the things that we have to do to recognize is pay attention to the cues that are coming to us. And, nobody gives me feedback. There's feedback everywhere. Like, we can pick up that from anywhere. Everybody is projecting something all of the time. So there is feedback. And then if you want to look at yourself, do you have trouble delegating? That's usually a pretty decent sign. And when you do delegate and a mistake happens, or it's slightly off the line that you were looking for, do you take over and do it yourself? Right? Classic sort of sign of micromanagement. How quickly do you disregard somebody else's opinion or experience on something? How many decisions do you make? How many decisions does your team make? If you're making all of the decisions all of the time, probably time for a quick stop to look at that. And another one, and this is included in our questions right at the end of the session here, is, where are you looking for too many details? Where are you always picking up on what's going wrong and what's not right? Because if that is your main concern and your main focus, that is going to be coming out in every direction, because as the leader, you're always projecting something too.
Yeah, that is so good. Your last comment there about, if you're focusing on what's going wrong versus what's going right, there might be just there's never just a simple answer, but maybe there is. The simple filter of trying to catch people doing something great, or trying to catch people doing something right, versus seeing the bad, or seeing the miss, I should say. It's neither good nor bad. It's either a hit or a miss. And I think it also depends on the leader's view of, you're looking for an outcome from your team, your people. There's quite often many ways to get there. I may have a certain way of getting there, which may be entirely different than you, but if we both get to the same spot, does it really matter how? Right? So there's a piece in there for me around it. Are you trying to micromanage the outcome, or are you trying to micromanage the process? If that makes any sense.
It makes a lot of sense. And it's really, really hard to, if you've been doing it a way that works for you all the time and somebody else has their own way, it can be really tough to trust. And that's got to be one of the things that we're going to talk about in here, is trust. It lies at the base of this. As always, it's the foundation. To trust somebody else to get there in a way that isn't your tried and trusted route. And that requires to let go a little bit. And that requires you to actually watch and see how this works. Maybe this way is better than the way that you have always done it. But that's not easy. And the more overextended we are and the more under pressure we are, the harder that gets. So I'm switching just a little bit here, but one of the reasons why micromanagers micromanage is actually a fear. And so one of the first things we can do is look at, what are they afraid of? What's their leader? What's their consequence if the outcome isn't met? What does that look like? There's always a reason. As I said, I don't think that many people get up and think, well, I'm just going to try and annoy my team today. Or, in some cases, it's far greater than annoy. Like this causes a huge amount of stress and tension within a group. So yeah, it's important. And I think, we're going to come back to that idea of, what is the result that you're looking for? And what is the result that you're not getting? And what kind of conversation have we had around that? Yeah, no, that's so good. So you touched on trust. There's a couple of questions here, comments that get to this. And I'm not sure how we answer this one exactly, perhaps without a little bit more context, but what would be the possible reasons behind why a manager goes from completely trusting to being very micromanaging? So that's a good question, because it does happen. And when that happens, the first thing I'm going to go to is, well, where has trust been diminished? So what has caused that change? And if your past has been full trust, and now all of a sudden you've got full micromanagement, that's a huge swing. Surely if you've had that part before, and the key is catch it early. Is everything okay? Yep, fine. We know that fine covers a whole ton of stuff. And so I've noticed a change, and I've noticed a change towards details and how I'm doing this. What is it that you're looking for that I'm not providing? If you've got that immediate swing.
Sorry, and I was going to say, and why are you looking for it? It's not necessarily the what or how. I think quite often it's the why. And I sit uncomfortably on that why. We have to be careful with people, because if I say, Craig, why are you looking for this?
there's often a defensive reaction to the word why.
Okay.
And it, it varies.
Tell me more about that. No, seriously, tell me more. I mean, no, you just
so well practiced.
We joke that we come into Fridays going, there's going to be a time one of us surprises the other, and this was one of those ones. So
yeah,
I'm not sure.
What time is it? It's not even 8:30.
Yeah, it's 8:16, and we've already got there. So
okay, so
dig more into why potentially a challenge.
So and okay, first off, there's a whole strategy, the 5 whys. There's a time and a place for that too. But in most cases, if I come and I say, Craig, why did you do it that way? Or why is this bothering you so much? That why it's very directed, very pointed at you. And the reaction, the gut reaction, and we're basing this, it depends on the psychological safety. But if we don't have that coming out of our yin yangs, why says, why did you do it? It's a judgment piece, and that puts people on their back foot, because 9 times out of 10 when we feel judged, we go into that blame or that shame game. And the response that you'll often get from why is what we call stuck in bed. So blame, excuses, or denial. And if I come in and I say, okay, what's causing the change from what I saw a month ago to what I'm seeing today, that just angles the question slightly differently. So our healthier questions usually start with what and how, as opposed to why. There's a handful of people, it doesn't matter. They literally, it doesn't bother them. But there's an awful lot of people where that why is it's almost like a trigger into defense or justification. And that's not always going to give us the organic conversation that we're looking for.
Okay. Maybe I'm in the handful.
Right? Excellent.
No, it is good. And I see some of the comments here about it. It sounds confrontational. You're questioning my decision making. I don't disagree, with the concept with how you've described it. I get it. I think some of it, at least to me, is perhaps semantics around how you're phrasing a question to perhaps have it land in a certain way. And we've talked about this before. Quite often as a leader, your communication style has to flex a little bit with each of the individuals on your team.
Know your audience.
You may have folks on your team, you can say, why? Right? Yeah. You may have others who, to your point, if you go that route, could set yourself up for some backlash or defensiveness.
And I think we have to remember a couple of things. You just said one in there that's brilliant. Leadership is language. David Marquet's book nailed it with that title. And the other part is 100% you need to know your team, and there's always a context around this. Like the word why is so important. We talk all the time about know your why, understand the why. So it's about where you use that question and how you use that question. And we cannot forget leadership is a power differential. Like we speak all the time, leadership's a behavior, leader's a role. But when you hold that title and you're working with your team, there is a power differential. So it's going to make a difference how you ask that question. And I think that's really key. And then we're getting into all sorts of context and things that it's just different per team, per people.
Absolutely. And there are some great comments going on in the chat here.
I can't keep up with them.
Oh yeah, I know it's flying by this morning, right? How about we try it this way? Sorry, there was another really good one here that flew past. How is this information going to be used versus why do you want that information? Right. Yeah. Great ways of posing that question. So, and then there's a few other questions here that I want to get to, but one of the things the direction I was going with the why, right? If you're an individual contributor and you have a manager who has perhaps suddenly changed tact or tone or approach with wanting more detail, I think also depends on the situation the manager is in.
100%.
What's coming. Everybody ultimately has somebody to answer to, right? And so if you're an individual contributor and you think nothing has really changed in how you've approached your job, except how your manager is now approaching it. Yeah. I think sometimes it's safe to say there is something else that has gone on above your manager, which is causing this reaction.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think often we look to leaders to be quote unquote perfect in the role, never have those moments where leaders have challenges or perhaps don't micromanage or overstep. Right. And I think it's incumbent on all individual contributors and anybody who reports to somebody to understand that whoever you're reporting to has stuff going on as well.
And more to the, what we were saying before, like call that, we refer to it as calling it in, call that in. We often think it isn't our place to go have that conversation with our leader and say, is everything okay? Or how are you doing? And, look at the leader in front of you. They're a person, they're a human, and they probably need support too. And the more that we encourage this two-way conversation, the more understanding we have, then it becomes easier. And back to half the time, we don't know what our tone is. We don't know what our approach is, the effect that it's having, until we get really good at reading the cues, and that conversation, that two-way conversation improves. This is not all on the leader.
Okay. Some questions here that I was thinking about ahead of time as well. This whole concept of accountability and or versus micromanagement, right? Mm-hmm. So, there are people who are not accountable and who consistently do not deliver on time. What is a manager supposed to do in this case? Is this a place for micromanagement? Perhaps we've talked about that. How do you differentiate between active performance management for someone who's struggling and negative micromanagement? So for me, this is all about that what I'm hearing in these questions is it's this piece around accountability, right? Mm-hmm. How do you hold your team or individuals accountable to results without being, I think the fear is perhaps without being labeled as micromanaging? And should you be concerned?
So I think a lot of it comes down to language. So the place we have to start is what are you not getting that you need, and how are you talking about that? Because micromanagement often is about control, and how it goes wrong is it turns into controlling your people, and actually where the control needs to be is control the business side of it. And in that, what are the results that you're looking for? What does that look like along the way? And I think the other really important part is, we talk about accountability. Even accountability is a two-way conversation. Yeah. So accountability gone wrong is one way. Accountability gone wrong is me as the leader doing all of the talking, laying it down, boom, we're done, get on with it. And actually, while you're getting on with it, I'm just going to check over your shoulder and make sure you're getting on with it the way that I want. That, yeah. So in most cases, you have hired the adults around you, and you've hired them because they have a skill set. And so there lies the first trust. If we are all adults in the same space, we've passed the grade of, we've gone through school, we've had our teachers, et cetera, et cetera. So now how do we treat people as adults to get the outcome that we're looking for? And somewhere in the fountain that is the chat, it talks about a team conversation. And so you've got many vehicles. You've got a team conversation, you've got one-on-one conversations. And I think here's the other piece. We might say at the beginning of the quarter or the beginning of the year, say, this is the outcome that we're getting to. And we think because we've said it in a team meeting, we're done. But I promise you, if you're not talking about it, your team isn't even thinking about it. And so it's the cadence of the conversation. And within there, are we all aligned, and do we understand the goal that we're getting to? And then once we've got that goal that we're getting to, do we have some role clarity around what our roles are in getting to that goal? And then if as a leader, you've helped people understand their role, and the minute we talk about role clarity, we have to think about role acceptance. You can't perform under pressure unless you've got both. And every time we talk about a role, so Craig, say you're talking to me about my role, you have assumptions about that role. they will not be the same as my assumptions about that role. So we have to dig into that too. So that role clarity piece is a phenomenal team conversation. There's an excellent exercise by Steve Bull that, and we can post it in the after chat notes, but you actually have the conversation with your team. How do you see your role right now? What are the challenges that you face in your role? And I forget the other two questions, but what do you need from the people on the team? And I think the last question is, where do you see your role going? Because that's the other thing. If you're micromanaging this, you won't scale. Yeah. We can't scale, we can't grow. And so to know where people see it going, there's a different arm of support there. And so what we want to shift into is, once we've got that alignment, my job now is to support it and keep the conversation going.
It's so good. I think the one thing that I come back to a lot on this is when we look at accountability, especially where you have clearly defined goals and objectives and outcomes, right? Mm-hmm. Many jobs do, right? And I'll just take, I've run sales teams for many years, and there's a bit of a framework around looking at, what are your results, what have you generated, what's in your pipeline, and what kind of activity are you engaging in, right? So if we're having an accountability discussion, Jenny, are your results there? Fantastic. Let's move along. We'll take a quick look at the pipeline. Is it healthy? Good. We probably won't even talk about your activity, right? Mm-hmm. If the results aren't there, the pipeline's strong, we might do a little bit of look at the activity to see what you've got planned, right? If you got no results, no pipeline, we're going to spend a lot of time talking about your activity. What are you doing? What have you got planned? Where are you going? What does your calendar look like? Right. And my experience with this is that if somebody finds that as being micromanaged, sales probably isn't the right role for you. Right. And so if there's ways of looking at where I'm getting at with this is if you have clearly defined outputs, I think it becomes a little bit simpler to kind of delineate on this whole accountability versus micromanagement, and holding people accountable to their outcomes and what is expected in the role, I think then becomes difficult to be talked about as micromanagement. Because we all have to produce something in the jobs that we're in. Right? This is yeah. Right. If being asked to, meet the expectation of your role is looked at as micromanagement. Now, how you get there, you're probably going to get it. The more productive you are, the more leeway you're probably going to get, right?
Yeah. So a couple of things. One, is the outcome realistic? Because if you are holding me to something that is completely unrealistic, that we're going to have trouble in that space. Because if I don't believe it, and I know in your heart of hearts you don't believe it, all right, okay, so we've got to hold that realistic piece. And by realistic, I'm all for an absolute stretch goal, like 100%. We love a good challenge. We really do. But if we're going to embrace that, I love a good challenge. What we need as an individual contributor is the support from the leader. We will engage in that if I have your absolute support. And support is very different than direction. So there's two different ways that conversation can happen. The other piece is, how do we approach that conversation? So I really liked what you were saying there, in that it's how into the performance. What are you up to? How? And there's a directive conversation where the voice share is probably far more leader talking than the employee talking. Yeah. And so immediately we want to take a reflection on that. Ideally, the voice share is 50-50 at minimum. So if you're really talking about how, and you're really talking about my activity and what I'm up to and how I see this, because you have no idea. I've flipped here now. You're the leader now, and I'm the employee. But you have no idea. What you see on paper as numbers tells you a story based on your experience. And so there's nothing else that you can do but base that on what you know. And so that conversation has to be about what is really going on. What am I up to? And making space for me to explain that, or talk about that, or ask questions about that. And at that point, the conversation can go a number of different ways. You can end up coaching. There might be a learning moment in there. There might be, and we have to enter with the right mindset to get this. Oh, I had that story all wrong. I love what you're up to. I'm interested to see how this pans out. Yes, I've got you. I've got your back. So yeah, it's a yes and, I think.
Yeah, no, that's fair. I get it. All right, let's flip now. Let's think, and we've kind of touched on it and getting, because there's a few questions here around this, right?
Yeah.
This is an interesting one. As an individual contributor, is there a way to recognize you are being micromanaged? I was micromanaged for years and burnt out, and I really thought it was just due to the lack of work volume until I switched managers and realized that it was actually micromanagement.
Again, we talk a lot. Like, how do you feel as you go to work? And different people have different perceptions on this, and we've dipped into this from time to time. You know, some people hate the word happy for work. Work shouldn't be happy. Other people think that's a very cool part of work. And are you happy to go to work? How do you feel on Sunday night? Assuming you work Monday to Friday, how do you feel? What do you think of your leader? How are you led? And how much autonomy do you have, I think? You know, when we look at the bare bones of psychological safety, there's 4 levels to it. So this might be a good way, I think, to answer the question with a bit more sense is, do you feel included? Do you feel like you belong on the team that you're on? Do you get the opportunity to learn? And when you learn and when you grow, you can't do that without making mistakes. So what happens when you make a mistake? It's another key indicator. Do you have the autonomy that you want? And that's different for all of us. Some of us would just love to just say, just let me get on with my job. Let me get on with my work and have free, complete autonomy. And there are others who show up and would actually like to be told what to do. And that just depends on you, your life, and what's going on. And then the last one is, what happens when you challenge the status quo? That's sort of your highest level of psychological safety. And if you can challenge the status quo safely, my guess is that it's not micromanagement. Hopefully answering that.
Sorry, you just triggered one for me. So individuals that want that 100% free autonomy.
Yeah.
Oh, you're chuckling.
It's a tall
Why?
ask.
What's that?
I said it's a tall ask.
It is a very tall ask.
Yeah.
Right. It's I think, you know, what it triggers for me is that you know, if you're part of a team and you ultimately report to somebody, to not expect to have to, how do I phrase this? This isn't going to come out the right way. To not expect to have to answer to somebody, right? That could be taken the wrong way, but I certainly don't mean it that way.
I think what we're looking for is autonomy within the guardrails. So, and when we set guardrails, there are some who will push them and see how far they can push those boundaries. And we can embrace that or we can fight against that. But there are guardrails. And, you know, I've heard the expression, I actually have it written down in front of me, it's on a poster, stay in your swim lane. Because what can happen if you don't stay within those guardrails or your swim lane, you're actually worrying about things that's not your job to worry about, or you're trying to control stuff that's so far beyond it. And, you know, coming back to, you're an adult with a skill set, you were hired for a reason. Do that, because that's where your value and that's where your impact is. And so when we look at that kind of continuum, at the one end, there's complete autonomy. Most entrepreneurs who work by themselves, that's their gig. Like, they have complete freedom to do what they want to do. Those who choose to work for an organization, work for somebody else, what we want is the freedom within the guardrails, and set those guardrails. If you're a leader, you don't set them, you don't have boundaries, you get what you've tolerated, what you've asked for, really. But recognition too that there are those who actually do want to be told what to do. And then I think within that too, we change as we go. And if you have a lot of stress in your non-work life, you know, maybe you have parents who are unwell, or kids that aren't doing very well, or whatever's going on, we can switch between. We can show them, say, like, I just need some structure and some guidance for a little bit here. And we can hit those times where we're thriving, and we're on a roll. And I think within that, it's sort of all based on the premise that you have a job that you actually like to do. And that's got to be key. If you don't like your job, then it's different.
Yeah, for sure. Along that line then, so as an individual contributor, the question here is, what are some tactics to manage a micromanager? And before you jump in, I want to share one that I shared this with you earlier in the week, because Instagram's always listening. But the advice here was, my best tip for a micromanager boss is to treat them the way they treat you. Just bombard them with information, constant updates to what you're doing, loop them into every single email you send, add them to every call. Be like the FBI overwhelming a small-time lawyer in a movie. So I'm assuming that's probably the far extreme of how to manage a micromanaging leader. But what are your thoughts here?
Well, I think I said this to you in my response. You're also not wrong. As funny as that is, it's just the language again, isn't it? So I think the first thing, if you feel like you're being micromanaged, I think the first thing to do is stop and take a look. What are you doing? So it's always two ways. There's two people in this. There's something that's going on. So what does that leader need that they're not getting from you? And in a very extreme situation, perhaps that is what they need to do. Like, if it is a lack of trust, and if it is that they aren't sure, like, give them the evidence that they're looking for, and get ahead of that communication piece. And so, here's what I'm working on, here's what I've done, here's what it looks like. The danger in that is that takes time, and now we're spending time serving there, but it probably won't take too long to catch up on where that gap is. So that's one part. And another part is it a skill set? Are you doing something for the first time that they don't have any evidence that you actually do have a skill set in this or a strength in this? And then in which case, what do they need to know that will allow them to trust that you've got this? What has been set up as, we often see it in delegation, like something gets delegated, but we, leader and the person, has forgotten to have the conversation. The leader still holds the responsibility and the accountability. And so to an extent, it's their job to check on how that's going. Well, there's different degrees of checking in on how that's going. So let's talk about that beforehand. Jenny, I'm still accountable for this. I'm going to check in every day. Okay, there's a body language there. What's going on? I don't think you need to check in every day, but let me check in with you on a Friday. I will commit to letting you know on a Friday how it's going and what I've achieved. And so we're flipping the onus a little bit, but we want to get ahead of what's going on there. I think the other thing too is take more ownership of timelines, take more ownership of the results. We tend to you talked about results and the performance that leads to the results. So the performance is our job, how we do it. We're always going to get results. But if we can articulate, I see them and I know what I'm going for, and that, then that might help to calm that bit. Ultimately, the short answer, I've just taken 14 sentences to get there. You've got to have a conversation if you can.
Yeah, no, and we've talked about that so many times, about having the conversation. And we need to be careful about not painting every person who's on the line or anybody who may listen to this with the same brush, and that it is just so simple to go have the conversation with your manager, right? There may be some situations where you can't. And, honestly, I struggle. I feel for anybody who might be in that situation where you just cannot have the conversation. But I think part of it too, for me, is we often expect leaders, again, I'll come back to this. We often expect our leader to, know it all, fully recognize it, have great understanding and tremendous empathy and insight to what I'm thinking and feeling about how they are managing me every moment of the day. right?
Mm-hmm.
It's not true. Yes,
Well, they're
you're
real.
in a position of leadership, you should have greater or elevated insight than perhaps others who may not have that same level of knowledge. But leaders have stuff going on in their day-to-day too. They have leaders they report to. They need to, I guess where I'm going with this is, as an individual contributor or somebody who feels they're being micromanaged, if you're not getting the results you want from your leader, have the conversation. Right.
Yeah. And I think too, like we've mentioned it through, but I think it's helpful for us to do it again, is just recognize what trust is built on. And so Charles Feltman's model, which is the one that we use within Leading Beyond, is, there's 4 domains to trust, and they are care, sincerity, reliability, and I've just lost them on because I've said them in backwards order. Reliability, sincerity, competence, and care. There we go. There's the 4 of them. And so the part with trust is we assess trust in all 4 of those domains, and we assess it both ways. So when micromanagement happens, a lot of the time, there's a trust piece that has been broken. Which domain has it been broken? And if we start to look through those 4 pieces, that becomes an easier conversation to have. We keep, to your point, we arbitrarily say, have the conversation, and that's just not possible. Okay, well, if it's a reliability piece, what do I need to do to show that reliability? If you say, I'm going to have it done tomorrow, and constantly you're the end of the week, it is the end of the week, but you're not doing, if you say I'm going to have it done on Tuesday and constantly you're a Friday, that's a reliability piece. Okay, well, that's something that you can control, you can change, and you can take care of. And you can also show evidence of. It's a competence piece. Competence is, do we have the skills to do the job? But competence is also, I don't have these skills. Mm-hmm. There's an ask, there's a conversation to have. And competence is also, I have too much on my plate. I can't do all this. What can I lose? Or what can this do? So there is lots of different ways, and where that conversation isn't safe, I would suggest kind of trying to step back from it and look at the bigger picture. We get very caught in it because it's so uncomfortable, so unpleasant, and it can drag us down. And when we drag us down, we close in on it. So if you can, step back and take a look at it. Okay, what might have caused this? What part do I play? And that's not a fun place to go to, but it might be a part that will help lift or sort of elevate it a little bit in order to have the conversation, or even just in order to find room to breathe so that you can make some decisions moving forwards from there.
So good. It's time to wrap up. Folks, I know there's a number of questions here that we haven't gotten to, and we will take a look and try to address as much of it as we can in the follow-up or the show notes when the podcast episode of this comes to life. But we do wrap up every week or every session with one big idea, a couple of concepts, and some questions for you to consider on this. So this is me stretching as Jenny gets to the slide. There we go.
There you go. We're there.
All
Thank
good.
You. I appreciate that.
I was going to tell you what number the slide was, but I was afraid that might have been micromanaging.
I would have called that support, but you're okay. Whatever.
Yeah.
Whatever.
There you go.
Okay, so as Craig said, every time we have a conversation, we will always leave you with what our big idea is. Sometimes it's somebody else's that we've borrowed, and we'll credit them. 2 things that you can take away, put into practice pretty quickly if you choose to. And the promise is 3 questions. Sometimes we stretch that a little bit and we have a few more. Our big idea today, accountability does lie at the heart of micromanagement. We actually didn't talk about this, Craig, but as a leader and as an individual, what are your non-negotiables? What are the things that you won't budge on? Are we talking about those out loud? And what are the people around you? What's their non-negotiables? And also, what are the team non-negotiables? We can have those out in conversation early within the expectations. It gives us those guardrails that we talked about in our conversation. 2 things that you can leave with. We've talked a lot about trust. This is a great question. I did add this on the end, so we have 4 questions at the end today. What can you pre-approve today? If you are joining us here with a title that's a leader, take a step back. Where do you get in the way? Okay, what can you pre-approve? And within there, this is like a 3 for the price of 1 strategy. Take a look at your delegation. What could you delegate? What are you holding on to that you like doing because you've always done it? Where are you holding growth back from somebody on your team? It's a really good self-awareness exercise. And those of you who haven't come across the decision tree, it's Susan Scott's from, I think, Fierce Leadership, could be Fierce Conversations. But look at where the decisions are. She talks about a tree. The leaf decisions are the ones that anybody can make any day without reporting back to you. We want as many leaf decisions in the team as possible. Craig, perhaps we can put, I have a short version of that. We'll pop that into our show notes as well for those who haven't heard of the decision tree. Good. Our second strategy, again, for those of you who hold a leader role, what's your important list? What are the things that you've been trying to get to, but you just haven't had time? And it's your job, making a process more effective, having a conversation that could build the business side, developing relationships, learning, whatever that might be. What's your important list? And so if you had more time, you could start on that work. If you are doing other people's work because you can do it better than them and they can do it well enough, let them do well enough and go do your brilliant work on the important items that need you behind it. And then you've got both accomplished in the same time that it would have taken you to do someone else's work. You'll get 2 for the price of your 1 in the timepiece there. Definitely worth considering that one. You got to let it go just a little bit to hit that important. And then, 4 questions. Sorry, Craig, but 4 questions today. And now I have to read them out loud because at some point this is going to be heard and not seen. So as you leave us today on your Friday, contemplate. And hopefully for most of you, it's a contemplation for Monday. What are the results that you are looking for? When did you last talk about them? Okay, does everybody around you know them? Can they tell them to you? This is cool. Who are the idiots around you? So I'm halfway through it. This is my new favorite. The book called Surrounded by Idiots. And it really talks to the fact that when people don't operate in our mode of thinking, our go-to is to call them an idiot and write them off. And obviously that's not going to get us very far. So where do you find yourself in your inner judgment in the back there thinking, we've got to change that frame. They're not. What are you not seeing? What do you not know? And engage in there. But we have to recognize where we judge in order to have that conversation. To Craig's point early on today, and it's such a good point, what are you recognizing? What have you celebrated? The details are important, but the celebrations are equally important. And then there it is back again. What could you pre-approve today? There you go.
Excellent. I've popped the link to SIG Corporate Training in the show notes. Please follow us there. All the upcoming sessions will be available there for registration. And this next upcoming one, I believe my wife really wants me to pay attention to. So unleashing the art of listening. And she must have snuck this topic in with Jenny, but it's all good. I'm looking forward to the conversation. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. Jenny, as always, I appreciate you. And have a great weekend, everyone.